So welcome everyone to this edition of Making Sense here at the Labour Party office with a very special guest. We have here, before announcing him, I'll go through some of my introductions. I'm Emiel Bongaerts, working at Foundation Max van der Stoel. I'm happy to moderate this session this evening here, and thank you so much for joining here online. We organized this with Foundation Max van der Stoel and also together with the International Office of the Labour Party. So thanks also to them for co-organizing. So across Europe, we see debates about ending the war in Ukraine. They're intensifying and they are there. And it's really important for us also to see and to discuss with people about how we can create also from Europe together with Ukrainians a just and sustainable peace. And I'm very happy that we're here with Yaroslav Hrytsak. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Emma, for having me here. It's a privilege.
Thank you so much. Today we'll discuss with you also from a historic perspective on how a just and sustainable peace for Ukraine can look like, and also how Ukraine's history plays into current narratives about it. So it's a real pleasure to hear from you. You've already done a whole tour through the Netherlands. Well, Netherlands is not so big, so it's not such a long ride.
It's probably not big in that size, in the terms of size of the territory, but what you do and help Ukraine makes you very big, because basically, as I said on many occasions, if Ukraine sees some country which helping intensely a lot, they all play Netherlands on the top.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a key thing also for the Dutch to support Ukraine wherever and how we can. So it's a pleasure also to having this interconnection here. You're one of Ukraine's most prominent historians. I also looked up some of the places where you are also affiliated to universities. There are many, but in the Lviv University, as well as the Catholic University of Kiev, if I'm correct. Oh, Catholic University of Kiev, but also University of Lviv, but also University of Kiev, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe to just start off very broadly with the first question. And before going there, I also want to put to the audience that if you want to ask a question, please do so in the Q&A. So that's also where this discussion is for, to have your input also here towards us at the Labour Party office, to hear from you and to also hear your questions and ideas. So we will definitely relay those immediately here in the conversation. So maybe to start, Yaroslav, what for you, coming from an historical and societal perspective, what does for you a just peace mean for Ukraine at the moment?
Thank you again. Things here in The Hague for Ukraine is just peace means if Putin would be brought here, not as a political leader or as a guest, but someone who is responsible to stand in the courts as a tribunal in The Hague. This is something very important. Has to be punished for his crime he did, because basically in many senses I do believe this is personal war of Putin. I do not say that Russia doesn't support Putin, they do, but without him it would hardly happen. So this is something that's important. But broadly speaking, if I may, I have a friend of mine who's an American journalist. His name David Reeve. By the way, he's a son of Susan Sontag. I bet this name sounds familiar to many of you. And he, for the last 30 or so years, has been visiting all the kind of the hot spaces, the wars in the Yugoslavia, in Africa, in any other spaces. And he comes to Ukraine quite regularly. He says what makes Ukrainian war exceptional, in his understanding, this is the only just war that he knows. That you see very clearly who is the victim and who is the responsible for this war. This is for the first time. So what I'm saying, this is just war, just peace, has to come after the just war. This is something which goes together. So I've been a member of the group which is called Global Ukraine, and the very beginning where we came we came with a manifesto which is called for just and sustainable peace. I went into details. There's a very long list of problem there, but basically we want to change the regime in Russia, because basically Putin has to be gone, has to be avoided, moved out of the scenes. Restoration of Ukrainian border, without doubt, 1991, and also the kind of the retribution, the resource retribution of the money, all the kind of things, very much like what was done to Germany. But there's one point which insists very much, on which we insist very much. We are afraid that once Putin regime has collapsed, would collapse, the West, what I mean by the West, would again let Russia go that easily as 1991, because Russia need to be changed, and Russia couldn't change itself. There must be some put pressure on the Russia to change the regime, so to say, and therefore, West, what I mean by the West, has to have a program what to do with Russia at the moment when the peace would be just peace. In this sense, I would like that we have to listen to Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are very good experts how to deal with Russia. Again, what I'm saying here, if I may suggest, there is this text manifesto of the sustainable peace, which is an English version. I probably provide you with a link. There is a kind of the very detailed problem, but the basic things that we have to remove we have to remove Putin regime as an existential threat for Ukraine and for you. This is the point.
Yeah, and this manifesto will definitely share. We can also share afterwards, probably with the audience as well.
Please do. Please do.
So we'll be in touch and we will connect about that. So, understanding correctly, indeed, as you also have said, is that very much the future lies in having also a vision on how a new Russia should also be working vis-a-vis Europe, and we should not fall in the same mistakes of after 1991. What kind of mistakes do you mean there?
We have normalized Russia. We have to turn Russia in a normal state, like Germany has been done with Germany, so to say. So first of all, I believe that we have to see root of the evil and root of the evil. And root of the evil is very much historical. And this is the problem, is that it's a centralized state with a strong vertical, with a man in power who is not controlled by anybody or anything, has absolute power. I wonder if you know that, but Russian empire, in contrast to other empire, has been constitutional empire. So there's no check and balances. And there are several attempts of Russian themselves, Russians, to make Russia normal, but it always ended with the opposite results, because after every such a short period of the reforms, it ended with a counter-reaction, even coming of the new, more authoritarian regime, which is very much suppressive towards own citizens and aggressive to the neighbors. So to say, just let me remind you a simple fact that Putin came to power after 10 years of the reforms, democratic reforms of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. And this is the pattern, which is a historical pattern, the Russian pendulum, because once Russia moves to the liberal regime, it turns into this must be stopped. And to stop it, the most crucial issue, you have to do something with the political structure of Russia, which means you have to push pressure on Russia to start political reforms in order to limit the central power. And this is something I believe essential, because otherwise you have this kind of pattern repeating. So it's this kind of Russian pendulum. So this is basically it, because the change was, and there was a mistake from the West, that since Russia has a great culture, and Russia has been mistaken to has a kind of some tendency to liberalism, kind of stems. So once you start deal with Russia, negotiate with Russia, deal with Russia, make a business with Russia, everything would cut automatically.
Yeah.
So the business first and then democracy, it would never evolve that way. Because what happened there, especially in the 0 years, when the Russia became richer, they stopped asking questions in different way. Now we are rich, and where is our empire? Give us empire back. So you have to change political culture of Russians. This is, I believe, essential. So my point, yes, probably the new leaders of the country of Russia would start with demands or requirements that the sanctions be lifted. They should be lifted, but only on conditions that Russia would proceed with some kind of reforms. Like a very simple act, if I may, just my utopia, imagination say, there must be written constitution that no agent KGB could be president of Russia. Never again, so to say. So this is something which I believe is very important, and therefore I believe also this is task of you as a party, because there's something must be built. I believe there are probably young people in Russia that probably also make the kind of party, but you have to inculcate this kind of political problem, political reforms.
Yeah.
Deep political reforms.
Many things I would like to ask on top of this, and maybe to to start, and to follow up on what you were saying about 1990s, the zeros, and then what's happening now, the normalization of economic normalization of Russia, and which have turned it into an expansionist state.
If I say this is, let's call it Merkel politics.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point of Merkel.
Yeah.
Let's deal with Russia, let's make a business, and we'll turn it into a normal party. This is the biggest mistake.
Yeah, and we bring it into a framework, economic framework, well, and then it normalizes, and the other thing happens. So you would definitely say that the mistakes also have been made a long time before 2014 also.
So because basically the problem with Merkel and other people, they don't know history. They understand history. You have to be a historian or have a historical perspective to see that this works, that these reforms may work very differently than is expected. Yeah.
And looking towards also Democrats in Russia, opposition in Russia, it's at the moment immensely difficult to organize because of the repression. What would you foresee that organizations can and should do in this whole endeavor? Because it's also many people say also the exchange of knowledge and Russian people coming to Europe still remains important and shouldn't be sanctioned. How do you think about that? Because to keep the exchange with Democrats.
We Ukrainians are very much disillusioned with the Russian position. And on 2 points. One point which I discussed with Russian friends, and they say the Russian position has no chance to come to power. Let's face it. They pretend they have a chance, they don't. So they're probably good as a kind of marking point because there's some different alternative, but they don't have no chance. I don't believe it has a chance for probably 1 or 2 generations. Most probably what will be the scenario for Putin was probably his end, his death or whatever it is, or coup d'etat, but he will be replaced by the people from his milieu. Like after the death of Stalin, Khrushchev came to power, which himself has made accomplishments to say. So this was the most probable scenario. So what I'm saying, excuse me again, what was the question? I just lost my track.
Yeah, about keeping in some way the connection and exchange with Democrats from Russia.
So first of all, let's not exaggerate their role.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not exaggerate their role. Even so, there are some nice people there, but I don't believe they have chances. Given the previous record of Russia, especially given the war experience, that they would come to power in the foreseeable future. And secondly, very importantly, and this has been put very explicitly, many of them, if not majority, they're still imperialist. They're still very much imperial. Because we listen all the time. You may know it or not, Navalny was a hero, without a doubt. He self-sacrificed himself. But at the same time, Navalny never said that Crimea is Ukrainian. He said that Crimea is Russian. And this is something which disturbs us, because not a liberal way of talking, so to say. So I'm saying here that you may know it or not, probably don't know it, but there's a story was that in 1991, when the Soviet Union has about to collapse, so there was discussion in the Yeltsin milieu. Yeltsin at the time was first democratic elected president, and there's this milieu of the Russian Democrats who supported him. So there were discussion what to do with Ukraine. So after the summer liberation, they decided they have to let Ukraine go, on conditions, because they don't believe Ukraine is a sustainable nation. This experiment will fail, and then Ukraine would come back to Russia, but that time's on the knees and begging to be accepted back. So this is the expectation of Russian liberals, so to say. Why I'm saying that? Because people tend to forget that Putin started his career in this milieu. This is exactly. His chief was Alexander Sobchak. Probably not many people remember. He was second most important man in the after Yeltsin, and his statement was very much anti-Ukrainian. So I'm saying this was very disturbing for us. So what I'm saying here, if you want to work with the liberals, Russian liberals, I believe you have to put 2 questions, checking questions. First of all, whether Crimea is Ukrainian or not. This is the most crucial issue, so to say. It's not about the reality. It's about kind of the principle. And secondly, are they ready to ask for the moral? Are they ready to accept moral responsibility and ask Ukraine for forgiveness? Even so, they are not pro-Putin and they have no responsibility, but still, this kind of sign of good. It's a good. It's a signature of the good attitude. Even so, you're not pro-Putin, but still feel responsible. There's probably one example when I'm talking here. There is a rather famous Russian liberal author called Mikhail Zygar, who wrote some very good books, especially since the beginning of the war. One is probably one of the most popular, called A War and Punishment. I strongly suggest to read it, because this is about how the war came into being. But his opening chapter is, he asked his friend in Ukraine to forgive him. Even so, he's not pro-Putin. We say it's moral responsibility, because once you have to establish connections, so to say, I have to accept responsibility for my country. So these are two checking points. Just test them. There's a problem now. There's a called Berlin Declaration, which is accepted by the Russian opposition 2 years ago or so, but not all of the Russian liberals are ready to sign it. So this is a check, to check. Because again, you have to push them, many of them. Because even so, they are anti-Putin. They still have a hesitant about Ukraine, about Donbass, about Crimea, about whether Ukraine is real a nation, that kind of thing. This is something that has to be checked.
Yeah, it's in checklist indeed, and yeah, also as you're saying, it's very much important to also ask questions about the moral obligation and the connection they also have to their regime, because it's also very much sometimes detached, whereas people are not being seen as like completely detached from what the Kremlin is doing. Well, it remains
because basically acceptance point of view is denying of agency.
Yeah.
Because you have to have accept agency with good and bad implications, so to say.
Yeah.
We have a very good example in Ukrainian case. I would say we have a much more trouble and problematic relation with Poland. Our wars with Poland, Polish war, Ukrainian war has a lot longer track and was probably some more bloody in the medieval times. But when the Soviet Union has collapsed, this would two sides did. They asked for forgiveness. The form was very simple. Like we have the French-German reconciliation in the 50s, when two sides come together and say, "Forgive us, and we forgive you." Then the formula was repeated with the German-Polish reconciliation with the same thinkers. So this is, I say, this is a normal language, because you accept responsibility for the thing that you don't like, which probably is not yours, but still you accept responsibility for the things your country, your nation did, because this is entry ticket into normal dialogue. Without this entry ticket, it's very hard to start any kind of negotiations, any kind of the reasonable dialogue.
Yeah. And coming from your historical perspective, do you also see the connections there and kind of comparable cases with similar situations in and after the Second World War, but maybe even before Second World War, where we also saw the worlds in the power very much shifting quickly, and also main world powers also becoming much more introspective or national or imperialist in many ways, as we also see with the US right now.
So, but I would say that we in Ukraine, we cherish very much the Europe. It's not a pathetic word, because for Europe means many things: better standards of life, political stability, rule of law, but most importantly, it's no war zone. This is exactly quite opposite what we now experienced. Because I believe in many senses what they have as the European Union is an historically unprecedented phenomenon. For the first time in global history, we have a large entity, which comprises practically all the continent. And there's no war is imaginable between two nations or two neighbors. Even so, before that, there was waged wars for centuries, but they were like French or Germany, or French and Britain, and Germany, Poland, all the kind of things. So this is something very important. It's an unprecedented historical phenomenon. We have to be cherished, constructed, built on the kind of things. And my idea is, again, it was built on the idea of reconciliations. Never again. But never again has to be taken some kind of the structural effort, structural reforms, institutional things. We started with the French-German reconciliation. You probably remember this kind of the agreement on steel and coal. Mm-hmm. Which was then joined by the Benelux and Rome. So they did it, but they were smart. I mean, people like Adenauer and de Gaulle, that above this kind of economic situation, kind of agreement, they build up a kind of the humanitarian program to make these people talk to each other, to have exchanged the ideas of the kind of dialogue. That's exactly what I meant. So what I'm hearing again, because this is the put history back to overcome the history, as you say. Because basically what I'm saying here, again, in a sense, Russia was not much different from Europe, because Europe was also very bellicose. Europe also had wars for centuries, and all the First and Second War has origins in the Western Europe, not in Eastern Europe, not in somewhere else. That's what I'm saying here. But that's exactly what happened there, because European Union or a leader in Europe has a kind of this courage and by wisdom to put history behind with special efforts. So what I'm saying here is our task, but this will become after the war, how to extend this no-war zone farther to the east as far as possible. Without that, Ukraine has to be part of this war, because it's very essential for Ukraine. It's also, I believe, also essential for Europe, because we have the danger comes from this system from Russia itself. Basically, it's boils down to the fact that you have to end with the empire, and the colonization. I have to start with this colonization, because it's still kind of like a last whimp of the Russian empire, because they want to preserve. So nowadays we are facing new challenges, because we have a Trump, we have a Xi, because they want to return to this kind of the world when the empire still matter, when power still matter, things like that. Again, I don't have a scenario here, because scenario is not in the words, but in deeds. You have to create such circumstances, or whatever said, that could connect Ukraine and European Union very closely. Because now Ukraine is one of the guarantee that this system could not be moved, could preserve itself. Because basically what is now Ukraine is the country with the largest army, which keeps Russia at the bay, so to say. So this is what I'm taking here. So again, the idea of helping Ukraine is not about Ukraine. It's something about much more bigger. Safety of Europe, present this kind of precedent, and to keep it make it larger. But also, since we know Europe plays such important role, and it remains to play such a role in the global system, this may be a new global system, and this will be system preserved.
Yeah, and again, for me, many things I would like to ask, but I'm also getting a lot of questions from the Q&A, so I'm heading to the first one, and then we can continue also on some other things I wanted to check. First one is coming from Peace, his username, and it's "Thanks for being here, Mr. Hrytsak. Question, how much is the memory of the Holodomor still alive in Ukraine?"
Very much so, very much so. I believe that this is one of the most successful reforms has been done. Because, again, let me put this way, that famine was also in Russia and Kazakhstan and Ukraine. This was the most productive agrarian grain area, which was struck because this famine was artificially constructed. But you have nothing like that in Russia and in Kazakhstan. But you have this kind of as a memory of the Holodomor. So I say Holodomor has been, for the last 15 years, has been turned into central point of reference in Ukrainian history. Probably overextension, but the way the Israeli feels about the Holocaust, Ukrainians feel about the Holodomor, and this one also explains why this the resisting resisting Russia, because they believe it may happen again. And there's a Bucha coming into picture, other city which is follow this line. So what I'm trying to say, that when it comes to this kind of issue, Holodomor is probably now the largest consensus in Ukraine when it comes to historical memory. It doesn't matter east or west, Donbass or other part of Ukraine, Russian-speaking or Ukrainian-speaking, Ukraine is very much united against the idea that A, there was famine, because it was denied. Second, they said that the famine was artificial orchestrated by Stalin. And thirdly, most important, they believed that the famine was a genocide. And the reason why they believe so, because even so, Holodomor was tabooed strictly and the memory of the Soviet regime. It was still family memory for many people living in Ukraine, especially in the Russian-speaking East and the South. So once you have this kind of the initiation of this kind of, it's resonated from below. And this again, I'm saying, this goes without any doubt. It's not exaggeration. I'm talking about the social survey because it's following opinion polls. It's probably one of the most now strong consensus among Ukrainians in historical memory, which works especially nowadays in Ukraine during the war.
Yeah, yeah. And would you say that the current the post 2021 full-scale invasion of Russia, but also after 2014, the start of the war, has created some same sort of kind of a nation forging role than the Holodomor also did for Ukrainian identity? Or is it in some way comparable?
Yes, but we have to account there has been Ukrainian identity strong enough even before 2014, in 22, because there's we created a nation. It's a nonsense. The nation was before, but it's made consolidated in fact, also because it resonated. Because the thing that people, Ukrainians are surviving right now, it resonates with their memory of the famine. And they want it to happen again. So therefore, I mean, very importantly, the main slogan Ukraine never again, because Ukraine know what might happen if this war could not be stopped.
Yeah, yeah. And consolidation on many forms is a consolidation of an identity and a nation that has been forming since already the 90s, you would say, or of course even before.
What happened there? This is something which is very important, but might be missing for understanding many people who live in Ukraine. Identity is there and is relatively strong. What happened there, it has been transformed significantly because nowadays more and more people, especially Russian-speaking people, feel the same Ukrainians, and therefore the identity nowadays is not about ethnic but civic. You may remember or not, this is the picture or the video from the first day of the war, which became viral. When Zelensky, the president, stand in the court of his president palace and say, "We are here. We're not leaving the country," or the kind of thing. It has a tremendous effect on Ukrainians. Yeah. But it must be read also different way, because it has to be Ukrainian. There's 5 people there, his closest milieu. 2 of them are Jewish, the third is Georgian, and only 2 ethnic Ukrainians. So this gives you an idea of the character of Ukrainian identity. It's a very much multi-ethnic. It's not about language. It's not about religion. It's about the politics, politician, the choices. It's very important. And the choice is liberty. Yeah. Never again, all the kind of thing. This is kind of, again, what I'm saying here, because there's some kind of misunderstanding quite often about Ukraine. This war is not about identity, not interest. It's what about the values, what people believe, what motivates them, so to say. And Ukraine nowadays, especially since the Maidan, but the crisis is the war. Liberty is not just empty words. There's something for them around because the issue of survival. Because they do understand, if God forbids, Putin occupies Ukraine, there will be tremendous repression of the Stalin style. And this, they want to have it.
Yeah. And the clash of values, as you say, is it between democracy and authoritarianism?
Yes, you may put that way, but let me just turn your attention that Putin is claiming he's defending traditional values. He's talking about values. And his values is that his claim is anti-West, anti-liberal values. Because we believe that liberalism is corrupting people. Because liberalism is about the LGBT, all the kind of things, and he stands for the strong church, strong family, all the kind of things. Probably more or less the same discourse you have Iran or in Trump. Because the kind of the returns will say. So what I'm saying here, this is basically, we call about Ukraine. It's a values of self-expression. People want to express themselves. It's very important, especially young people, which means they stand for the liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of choice. They have a less and less tolerance to corruption. They have a different currency. And they call it, it's probably ironically, European values, because they believe this is the best European values. And this is irony here, because I always used to say that values is not just descriptive. This is something goes more deeply, because values is the ideas or the things that you believe to the extent you already sacrificed to that on them. If values are not just declarative, so to say. If say you're standing for peace or stand for democracy, but you're not ready to defend it, this is not really values. This is declarations. So when I say Ukrainians are really believing this value to extent they're ready to sacrifice for them. This is the most important lesson that Ukraine could provide for the West, because they mean values matter. Also, they talk European values.
Yeah.
In a sense, Ukrainians believe more in Europe than Europe believes in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, many people in Europe aren't even thinking about defending those values or standing for those values. It's happened, of course, it's happening in Ukraine for already years, every day in that sense. So I think that's a very, very powerful thing that's definitely also recognized.
But there's a trick here. There's a trick here, because basically the historians know that once you have a situation where the 2, 3, or 4 generations live in peace, they take it for granted. And therefore, the willingness to defend these values this vanish away, so to say. So this is kind of trick. There's a kind of irony. You have a long peace, and then you have the long peace which works against the self, because they could be very much defeated. We know this kind of pattern very well. For the historians know the thing, so to say. So this is exactly what I mean. Say you have to raise the awareness of the importance of this value under such circumstances. If I may put this way, we love Europe without a doubt. I mean, nowadays, specific as a kind of the opposition to Russia, because for the thing I discussed again. But we want to be different. We want Europe to be different. Not just kind of the union, political union, economic union, which is very successful, but also union which could solve a most basic issue, and it's a security. But you can't build security without solidarity. And to build solidarity, you have to work with the values, because otherwise we are a much atomized society. So what I'm saying here, this is something, let me put it this way. I believe that Europe was in a crisis before the war and has to be solved somehow. And now the Ukraine, the war is exactly the crisis you probably needed to shape itself. And also in this kind of direction, because whether willing or not, we are facing new reality. The world is becoming much more dangerous. And Europe will be targeted very much. So therefore, there must be something done along this value, which means the Europe has to be constructed as a kind of the also construction of the security. And then since Ukrainian experience is very important.
Yeah. And it's in many places possible that direction is now becoming much more staunch after 2022, for example, in EU enlargement, where we see developments happening in the last couple of years, whereas it was in a complete standstill also in Western Balkans for more than a decade. And EU integration, would you see that also as a key component in this development for Ukrainian people to become part of the European Union, also to start the negotiation with the European Union about becoming member?
I have a friend of mine. You probably know this name. He's a very famous historian, Timothy Garton Ash. He's professor at Oxford. Has been found this transformation Europe and the communist part since the 1899. He wrote several very good books. He's contemporary historian. And he made once a very good point, which I like very much. He says that, kind of metaphor, if I may use, if you want to survive in the world of dinosaurs, you have to become a dinosaur yourself, which means Europe has no chance but to extend on the new territories. It means not military aggression, but just make it stronger, so to say. And he says that probably one of the evident directions to have a Ukraine and Turkey. Unfortunately, we lost a Turkey because Turkey is not stand on the list as a candidate for a variety of reasons, but Ukraine is still there. And if you have Ukraine, there's a long chain because you have Belarus, you have Georgia, which I'm sure they will follow this part, so to say. So what I'm saying here, you have to extension of Ukraine is not a kind of the, how to say, choice or wish, it's a must in this kind of the world. Probably somehow 20, 30 years will change, the situation will differ, but this is kind of the dire need exactly now. And this is exactly when I see the Ukrainian interest and European they coincide. Because for Ukrainians, Europe is a kind of no-war zone, and for Europe to withstand, they have to be extended further, extended into the new territory.
Yeah. I also am looking through some of the questions still coming in. Also got some one here. It's someone asks about the fight against democracy and authoritarianism, but then worldwide, and the war in Ukraine being also very much where you see democracy and authoritarianism collide. But and the question is, how do you react and see, for example, the current push from the US to have an imposed peace agreement, but also very much focusing only on not violating sovereignty, instead of also pushing for just and democratic peace in the future?
Frankly speaking, as a person who has a son in the army, who has many friends who are there, we are losing the people, I believe that any kind of peace deal work for Ukraine. Because Ukraine is really kind of the very dangerous situation, losing the people, losing territories, losing resources, all kind of things. So nowadays, when you have in Ukraine, which is kind of special in Kyiv, it's a humanitarian disaster because of the blackouts and the cold, all kind of things. So what I'm saying. But that said, we don't want any kind of peace. We want still justice, because there's some kind of the requirements has to be met. And what Trump suggests is not that could be that accepted. And I'm not telling on my words or on the words by Zelensky. This is the reaction of the majority of Ukrainian society. I know because of following the surveys. Ukrainians want, first of all, they believe in victory still, not in short run, but long run. And second, they still look on Ukrainian future optimistically, but they want a kind of the just deal. They're ready for compromises, but this must be just. And according to this, also had very important that it must come with guarantees, because otherwise we know that this will be a stop of the war, but not end of the war. Because in any case, Putin could break this kind of the peaceful agreements and start again. So what I'm saying here about trying to get to yes, peace must be achieved, but on the conditions to be compromised for the both sides, because so far there's no compromise on the Russian side. They're just pushing the Ukrainians to compromise, which is very painful and unjust. And the only way to make Putin accept or to change his attitude is to put a stronger pressure on him. Because the only language he understands is a language of power and strength. I don't mean to say there has to be a military attack, but there's many ways to do it. Like it has been discussed before by many experts, including Russian experts, anti-Putin experts, that one of the most efficient sanctions will be secondary sanctions, so to say, because it'll cut Russia from the support or supply from India and China. So there's many ways, but you have to put some kind of pressure. This is what I'm afraid. Instead, putting pressure on Putin, Trump put pressure on Zelensky. So this is something I believe the role of European Union to change this kind of position, to put a stronger pressure on Putin to make him sit by the negotiation table and make compromise as well.
Do you feel frustration in Ukraine also with the lack of like a coherent voice from the EU on this issue, or the lack of that the EU is able to kind of be on the forefront of this discussion that's very much being dominated by US and also Russian kind of talks?
Not that much that part, because basically we appreciate very much, because most of the European leaders that help Zelensky to talk with Trump. You remember this kind of story. We appreciate very much, because otherwise Zelensky will left his Trump alone, his position will be much weaker. What we do complain, or they kind of irritate us, that most of the things that European Union promise or says is not implemented. And you probably remember this 3 days ago, Zelensky has a speech in Davos. It's about that. It's exactly what Ukrainians feel. That stop talking, do something, because there's too much words and too much promises, and then found out that this is promise not met. You may the simple fact: Ukraine has been promised rockets from from Germany, and then quite a sudden, a few days ago, Ukraine will never receive it. What kind of talk is that? Is that the
Taurus rockets? Yeah.
So this is exactly what the point is. Ukraine has to shape up. Europe has to shape up. There's a waking up call. Ukraine is buying time for you. For how long? We don't know, because time is running out. So this you have to be much more active, you have to be transforming, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and the urgency must be, there must be much more urgency on the matter.
Without a doubt, you have to raise awareness of the dangers. It's not so, put it this way, this was also my experience of Ukrainians. We didn't believe the war is coming to the very last moment. We still has kind of the relaxing attitude that this probably would omit us, so to say, this probably to exaggerate all that kind of thing, but then war started. So this we have to be beat that we are on the same boat nowadays. And we know it for sure, because I mean, this is not just Ukrainian Secret Service, also so British says, and the Germany says, Putin is ready for the war with Europe. He couldn't stop. The only thing that keeps him from Europe is Ukraine. If Europe don't want to go into war, they have to help Ukraine to stand this war, so to say. But this must be much more stronger, much more intense, and much more efficient than we have now.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a sense, as you say, we must also be aware of our own kind of coping mechanisms, that we look away of these dangers, and then until the moment is there, as happened also before February 24, 2022, is also learn from that lesson in a way. Yeah. Which is also always, when I think about it, it's crazy that the wars are, the full-scale invasion already.
Basically, this way history help us understand, because basically, I'm sorry if this is probably sound too general, but we have some misperceptions. I'm also victim of this. Ukraine is also victims of this misperception. We believe that war is something which is kind of exceptional, which is somewhere there, which could never happen because it's irrational or barbaric. The thing is this. So, looking from historical perspective, war occurs much often than we think. Because in many senses, if I exaggerate slightly, war is a norm. Peace is exception. You have to build a peace. And the way to build peace is to raise your level of security and where of defense. So this is what I'm saying here. This awareness has to be raised and told.
Yeah. And do you think that because also looking towards European history, many of the peace has been made also by building European Union among European states, but also it has been a European focused kind of endeavor. But now also in this world, we see much more upcoming new powers. Multipolarism is there. Do you feel like the role of countries such as Brazil, India, South Africa, like maybe even China, should be increased in this kind of narrative of building peace, or is that something that the EU should stay away from?
Yes, without a doubt. We have to work in many directions because also we're part of Europe. But I have to draw attention that we have now the situation or circumstances that we could as an extension of Europe, because you have Canada, you have Australia, you have Japan, you have South Korea. So this kind of new entity emerging. We know about, on the other side, we know about the Slovakia and Hungary, whether it be part or not. So because this war has game changer. So there must be kind of a new coalition, whatever it is. So to say, without a doubt, they have to work with South. Because this is what, until now, it was territory of Russia and China, so to say. This must be something has to be addressed and done, in a sense, kind of the messages. I don't know, because we Ukrainians tried and we failed. But we failed until Trump came to power. Because I believe probably have the same effect, because I'm sorry if I exaggerate somewhat, but my impression is that war started in Ukraine, and at the very beginning of the war, European was slightly scared, but they stopped scaring because Ukraine was there and they kept fighting. So it took Trump to really scare Europe. Because when Trump is trying to say that he would remove NATO from the Europe, or saying he's still like Ukraine, or Europe quite of a sudden became very much undefended and secured. So this is the point. So actually, Trump changed the tables in terms of that the security must be some kind of the global character, because otherwise we'll be governed by the sea, Putin and Trump. Not the best should stay coalition, and therefore, I'm probably talking to general politics here, but this is what I'm saying here. Yes, without a doubt. And more important, this is I say, because I believe, and so I'm pointing finger on you, because social democrats leftist, has a different agenda, different message. Because in many senses, the war in Ukraine was considered a kind of the proxy war between the United States, which is capitalist imperialism, and Russia, which is kind of the traditional country. So exactly, you have to break this kind of pattern. We have to have a new left after this search of the new liberalism of the Reagan, Thatcher, Trump part, so to say. Especially, I would say, this is not because it's part of this story, this is my part of Ukraine. You have to focus on the younger generation, younger middle class, which is now much endangered everywhere, including Ukraine, because they have no future in this kind of the world. Not just because of the security about the war, but also kind of economic conditions, because the gap between the index everywhere. And this middle class does have the erasing, so to say. In my understanding, my explanation was right in my book, that Euromaidan protest was very much about that. This young middle class in Ukraine, we see no future if don't want to resist against this future. So this I'm saying here, this must be, you somehow have to step out, this is my point, step out of the national paradigm, just to see this kind of the clash of identities. It's also the kind of the clash of different social programs in this sense. So therefore, I believe this is, in this sense, if I put myself clearly, this is also a challenge for the left to make something along this line. Because otherwise, nowadays, the only alternative toward this kind of neoliberalism is come from the conservative right. From AfD, Le Pen, and say we have to have decent opposition from the other side. This will be a message from the south.
And a strong economic agenda, which can indeed bring the left back into a position to also be critical of what neoliberalism has done to our societies in many ways.
So my favorite historian, which likewise is Tony Judd, you probably know him. He was very much for the new left, because he was very critical of neoliberalism. He passed away 15 years ago, but in a sense he forecasted, he made what would happen, so to say. But basically, being very, I would say, he was at the same time very pro-Ukrainian, because you see this has come as the some part of the same agenda, because the agenda is about the justice. This is about the justice, so to say. You have to formulate where until now, until recently, left was being big, because they can't see it as a national issue. Because there must be some kind of, say, the combination of the both national and social message at the same time. Because otherwise, it's like a two wings. You could work just on one wing. You have to somehow accept this kind of national issue is important, because decolonization can appeal, so to say. This kind of the challenge for new agenda for everyone has an agenda, but it's like for finding a new language, new messages, how to appeal to people, especially young people, globally.
I'm looking also towards time. Time is going quite quickly, but we have a couple of questions still from viewers. One of those is how you foresee political parties develop in Ukraine in the coming time. And maybe that's also an interesting question in connection to what you're just saying, also about if the left is also upcoming.
So one of the major deficits in Ukrainian politics is exactly lack of any meaningful leftist project. It has been compromised by the communists, and then after the collapse of the Soviet Union by the Ukrainian Social Democrats, which is not the Social Democrats with oligarch party, but they stole the title Social Democrats. So left are not trusted and disliked. So what I'm saying here, this must be something the part of Ukrainian political future nowadays. This must be some kind Ukrainian social democratic oriented leftist party. This is something very important, because for the kind of completeness of Ukrainian political life. Secondly, without a doubt, Ukraine is a young state, and the young state tend to be authoritative. And Ukraine has several times this kind of temptation with authoritarians. Luckily enough, it overcome this authoritarian because of two Maidans. But even so, Zelensky is also authoritarian. This must be faced. His populist authoritarian, and if he will not be checked, he goes into this direction. You probably remember the last year, he's kind of the supported or even introduced this kind of anti-corruption law. If not the protest of young people on the street,
Yeah.
It would be stopped. Also, corruption scandal, so to say. So I
Yeah.
believe the building of the decent, reasonable political life in Ukraine is a challenge. More so because Ukraine is a democratic country, but it's democracy by default. It's not institutionalized. Ukraine has to still build institution will be safe, give sustainability, like a make-up, just judicial system, all the kind of things. And this gives a big challenge for Ukraine. There's material there, there's civil society, which is excellent, especially keeping Ukraine persistent, so say. But the main challenge and problem with civil society, it couldn't produce any kind of meaningful political project to change the country. Because the homework still be done in Ukraine, and the homework is the building some institution. So what I'm saying here, we have to work for this kind of the restructuring political landscape in Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Indeed, that's also something that strikes us also the importance of having the left coming up and building an alternative in the Ukrainian political spectrum. Another question I see is as a historian, knowing about Budapest Memorandum and Minsk Accords, I can imagine you have zero confidence in a peace deal where you have to trust Russia on its word or commitment. Is that
Without a
so?
doubt, without a doubt, because anything that's written by the signed by Russia doesn't mean more than paper on which it's signed. If there is no strong guarantees and support from the West, this declaration would mean nothing.
Yeah, as we saw in those
In Budapest,
other
yeah.
ones. Yeah, yeah, that's clear. That's clear. And maybe going back to where we started on the just peace, that there needs to be also democratic transformation in Russia. So would you see that it would be key for Europe to push there as a part of the peace negotiation, the peace deal, as you said, to also push Russia to change in a way? What would be like a key component of that?
First, they have to defeat Putin regime.
Yeah.
Without that never happen. Because I used to quote this kind of quotation from Weizsäcker, former German president, who on the celebration of 40 years of the end of the Second World War said that the best thing that could happen to Germany that lost the war. So the best thing that could happen to Russia if Russia would lose the war. It must create a space and possibility to transform Russia finally into normal state, to stop this Russian pendulum, so to say. So this is the main challenge. First, you have to defeat Putin, to make this pressure, because unfortunately, I don't believe that we could achieve this part, this asking some kind of foreseeable future. I'm afraid, and I wish to be wrong, that this war for long. So they are very sustainable. It's not just we have to help Ukraine now, and what happens after this doesn't really matter. No, it's a war for long. We're in the process, so to say. If I may use this kind of a comparison, which has been used by other students as well, we in 1938. And nowadays the crucial point, whether we move to 1939 or we try to step back from this very much dangerous, so to say, point. And this is something minimum. And this will take a long time, because otherwise we will be pushing this direction. So sustainability is a for me key word. Not just sustainability of the peace, but sustainability how to keep Ukraine as long as it takes while Europe could transform itself.
Yeah. And Europe transforming itself, what would be your kind of vision and utopia there? How should Europe look like?
Europe is Ukraine, first of all. Europe is Ukraine. Ukraine, and also Europe as a new construction. I don't know what kind of construction is that. I couldn't forecast, but what I see from history, that as I said, Ukraine history is a kind of very bellicose, and it has many crises. If I may say, so the crisis is another name for Europe. Europe moves from crisis to crisis. What is good about Europe, optimistic about Europe, that most of the crises have found a kind of work solution that brings some kind of peace or probably prosperity for some period. Like you have a 30 years war of the 20th century with Catholic Protestant, with the Westfall of peace, and made the emergence of the Westfall system, or 100 years of peace after the Napoleonic War, or the European Union Organization United Nations of the Second World War. What I'm saying here that this solution couldn't work forever. They work for 2-3 generations. So therefore we always renovate them, so to say. So now we have the kind of renovation of this kind of the project, because we believe all order is gone, it has to be replaced by something. But I believe at the core of this global order, this my belief, probably topple belief, must be Europe with Ukraine.
Yeah, and probably if we look back, as it's not, as a historian, it's not what you do is look into the future, but looking towards history, it might be more easy to foresee certain things. And probably if we look back in 10 years or 50 years, you would foresee 24 February 2022 and 2014 as a complete change, also as how Europe sees itself, and also sees with a future with Ukraine becoming much more stronger democracy, much more coherent in many ways. That will be definitely a vision to look out for.
Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, at the very beginning of the world, put it very briefly. It's a Zeitenwende. It's a turning point when it comes to that. Unfortunately, he couldn't keep to this kind of his words, but it's a really turning point. So I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with the Ukraine playing this role, because otherwise we want to be like the Netherlands, having a very boring, nice but boring life, so to say. But it's exactly, we don't have no choice, because the enemy is there. The enemy is very dangerous and they're very strong, and you have to be prepared to stand there.
Yeah, and indeed, and also learning from what you've been saying is don't be naive about what the real goals of Russia are.
Yeah.
In this, and don't fall back into the same mistakes as has been made so many times. Also looks towards history in that sense.
Yeah, definitely.
That's I think the most important conclusion to gain from this talk, and also some key recommendations of what Europe should do in the future, also working towards just a sustainable peace, but also how to connect and try to connect with also Democrats in Russia, and be also careful in that sense, but also strategic. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yaroslav, Professor Hrytsak, thanks so much for being here. It has been a real pleasure having you in the Netherlands. As we said, you've done a tour, you've spoken to many people, and we will definitely love to stay in touch.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much, Emiel, for having me, and I wish you strength and resilience, as well as we Ukrainians do.
Thank you so much. And also to everyone joining in online, thank you so much for joining here, to all the party members and other people asking questions and being engaged. And we'll definitely organize more as events like these in the future. And it's for us really, really important to keep in this way the attention on Ukraine, and also for the time to come as a party, and also with our colleagues and people involved. So